Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar on the Centre for Environmental Justice Free Legal Advice Clinics. My name is Clodagh Daly, and I manage Community Law Mediation's Centre for Environmental Justice. As many of you know, our centre was set up in 2021, and it's the first of its kind in Ireland. But our free legal advice clinics on environmental issues are still quite new. And so the aim of this webinar is to explain the environmental justice clinics, the process, the types of issues we see, the types of issues that we're looking for, and how you can get involved. We're really grateful to those of you who have taken the time out of your day to attend this session, and we hope you'll find it useful for your organisation as well as the communities that you work with. I'm also delighted to take the opportunity to introduce Justine, my colleague, who is our new environmental justice lawyer. So Justine holds a Bachelor of Laws from Trinity College Dublin and a Master of Laws from the London School of Economics, where she studied European and international law. Justine was called to the Bar of Ireland as a barrister in 2005, and then to the Bar of New York as an attorney and counsellor at law in 2007. Prior to joining CLM, Justine worked at Client Earth, where she focused on climate law and strategic litigation targeting fossil fuel infrastructure. So really delighted to have Justine on board and leading on our clinic work. I'm now going to hand over to Justine to present, and I invite you to ask questions in the Q&A box as she is presenting. There will be time for questions after the presentation. So I'll hand over to you now, Justine. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Clodagh. Lovely to meet you all. So I think I'll just start by giving a little bit of an introduction to CLM and then to the Centre and the Free Legal Advice Service, and then just give you a little bit of an overview of the environmental issues that we see, and some of the environmental issues will be explained in a broad brush way. So just to get started about CLM, it's an independent law centre founded in 1975, and it was the first independent community law centre in Ireland. You might remember it previously having been known as Coolock Law Centre. So today the organisation has grown a great deal. And in 2022, for example, just under 5,000 people were assisted by community law and mediation across a very, very broad range of legal areas. So one of the areas is, of course, the environment, which I'll come to soon, but the services in general, which also apply to the environmental context, legal advice and representation, mediation and conflict coaching, and information and education. And community law and mediation also works on law reform, which is something that Clodagh can speak to a little bit more. So the Centre for Environmental Justice, founded in 2021. Part of the centre is the Free Legal Advice Clinic, which we talk about today. We also give community talks and trainings and provide information and resources, and we do policy and law reform work. So the question, what is environmental justice? What's this all about? Environmental justice brings an awareness to the idea that environmental problems disproportionately affect some people, that they hurt some people more than others. And often these are the very people who've contributed the least to environmental problems. So as a response to environmental challenges, we have to be aware of the inequality in terms of the impact, and to meaningfully engage with all people in seeking to develop a legal response to this and a policy response to this. So to have participation from all communities that are affected by environmental harms. Community law and mediation is involved in some strategic cases, which you might be aware of. You may have read about these. There are essentially 3 climate cases at the moment. 2 are judicial reviews before the High Court in Ireland, and 1 is a case before the General Court of the European Union. So these are all climate cases. And one thing to note about climate is that in some ways it's indirectly also about many of the issues that you'll see later, like air pollution. So some of the policy and law reform work, I just have some extracts there from different pieces that were prepared previously. So one on energy poverty, one on the Planning and Development Bill, which is now an act, a submission down below on the Climate Action Plan, for example. So this is the law reform work, which goes in tandem with the legal advice, advocacy and representation parts of the Centre for Environmental Justice. So the environmental issues that we see coming in through the clinics are just incredibly diverse. It is really any number of different issues that affect people nationwide. And very often they just traverse so many different areas. So it's a very interesting place to work, and it's an interesting challenge to have to address these many different issues, but just so that you're aware of what might be an environmental problem. And I think sometimes it's true that we don't necessarily think of things as environmental issues. You may think of them more in connection with housing or in another context. So environmental problems could be about air or water pollution, and we see these coming into the clinic. We have illegal dumping, waste burning issues as well, which is also indirectly air pollution. Issues coming in about access to green spaces and to biodiversity in the community. And there are many other areas that are environmental concerns in addition to any other legal avenues that you may think of. So, for example, flooding, poor housing conditions, dereliction, noise pollution, and also energy poverty, energy costs, and difficulty accessing information about environmental matters. So an example of one of the community talks that we've given there, you just see the flyer from it. This is to raise awareness about what constitutes an environmental issue, and that there is a resource there available to people who are looking to find answers to these problems. In addition, we also offer an outreach service, and this outreach service is for organizations that wish to come to us where they have found their constituents addressing environmental problems, and to attend a clinic with that constituent, so with that person, with our client. I think this could be valuable to your organization because it may allow for in-house capacity building regarding what constitutes an environmental problem and what kind of solutions might be available. I think it may be something that joint funding could be sought for, and it's something that we would offer on a trial basis. So if this is of interest, please do reach out. I think we'll see how we can work together and perhaps trial collaboration in this way. So one of the statements that's often made as well, we have a right to a healthy environment. And it's a little bit of a catch because we actually don't have a right to a healthy environment that is legally enforceable yet. So thus far, the UN General Assembly has recognized a human right to a clean and sustainable environment, but this is not yet enforceable. We have a constitution that dates from 1937, and which, unique for its time, established personal rights. So the Irish Constitution actually influenced other constitutions around the world. It influenced the German basic law, the German Constitution, because of this recognition of personal rights. But at the time, the idea of having any right to a clean environment, it just didn't exist. And the Supreme Court has been reluctant to read that right into the Constitution. So in Climate Case Ireland, it's otherwise known as Friends of the Irish Environment and Government of Ireland, the Supreme Court was asked, is there a constitutional right in effect to a healthy environment? And they wouldn't derive this right from the text of the Constitution. They just declined to do so. The European Court of Human Rights, is there a right to a healthy environment there in the European Convention on Human Rights? And the answer is no. No right to nature preservation. So what happens instead is that your right to, say, clean air or to not deal with industrial pollution is protected under Article 8, your right to private and family life. So no direct environmental right. Indirectly, there may be remedies under Article 8. Air pollution is one of the issues that we see in the clinic. And there's just a basic definition of it there, if you find that helpful, from the World Health Organization. There are various estimates about the impact of air pollution worldwide, but the most accepted figure, 6.7 million people a year. European countries, very, very high levels of air pollution, and the majority of us are breathing unsafe air. And I'll show you what that concept of unsafe air means shortly. What does air pollution do? Well, it potentially can cause respiratory illnesses, it can cause heart disease, and it can lead to a shortened life expectancies. And you'll see there the graphic about air pollution harming every organ in the body. So we'll see why that is in a moment, but just to note, that children are particularly vulnerable because of essentially they are closer to the ground, they're closer to the car exhausts. And an internationally acknowledged instance of this is the decision in 2020 by the Southwark Coroner's Court, recognizing that a little girl had actually died from exposure to air pollution. She died from an asthma attack. She'd had a series of asthma attacks. And part of the evidence presented there was that at times when the ambient air quality was very poor, she was being hospitalized. So there was a direct correlation. And the coroner, for the first time, it's said to be the first time in the world, found that somebody had died because of air pollution. So what is air pollution? Just a graphic there to show you how air pollutants compare to a human hair. So you get a sense of why it is that air pollution would get into every part of the body. The size of the particles, so one of the particles, PM25, is illustrated there in the red dot. So that's PM25, and you see how it compares to a human hair. And the other PM10, which includes dust, pollen, and mold, you see the comparison there, that's the blue dot. And then if you want to move away from the human hair, you can look at beach sand as a comparator, and you see that this is really tiny. Now, European Union laws have helped to reduce air pollution in Europe, and you see that from the graphics, which I think might be overly kind to Ireland, but you see that there is a projected improvement. So up to 2030, what they're aiming to do. And if we look back, we'd see also an improvement. So the different aspects of the regulatory framework, first of all, the EU Ambient Air Quality Directive, which is this revised directive. There was a previous directive in force as well. There's the Air Pollution Act as amended in Ireland, and we have air pollution solid fuel regulations as well. Now, what I found difficult about this, or what is a challenge through the clinics, is that many people are dealing with air pollution that is localized. So it affects them in their homes. And as we'll see, there isn't necessarily a remedy for this yet. The overall architecture of the Ambient Air Quality Directive is essentially to set limit values for various pollutants. And then the government is required to take certain steps in case of exceedances of those limit values. And unfortunately, yet again, there's no right to clean air and there's no individual right to compensation for breaches of this directive. So this is a judgment that's been heavily criticized, and perhaps there will be an opportunity for that to change at some point in the future. But for now, this is an obligation owed by states under EU law to the general public interest and not to any one person in particular. Now, the basic remedies available as a result are essentially to demand that an air quality plan is developed in the event that there is an exceedance. So that is, you have legal standing then to bring an action. And the government's also required to give information to the public about pollution that they may be exposed to. So just to look at what we've done in this area, we've had an air quality monitoring complaint come through the clinic. Client came in who was concerned about air quality in her area. And as a result of advocacy, we managed to establish that air quality monitors would be put in place. These monitoring tubes that are now in place, once we have the results of this, then we have potential next steps. In addition to the European legal framework, there's also a national framework for air quality. And you'll see there the image of wood smoke pollution in winter. One of the difficulties with the national framework is that Section 24 creates an obligation on the occupier of a premises to try to prevent emissions from their premises, but it excludes dwelling houses. So there's no obligation to try and reduce pollution if it's from a dwelling house, but you shouldn't burn something in your back garden that would be covered by Section 24. The approach taken by the state to air pollution is to regulate the fuel, which differs from the approach taken in many European countries where they regulate the appliance that burns the fuel. So what we have done is to regulate standards, set standards for the fuels that can be sold. and it's prohibited to sell fuels other than those that are compliant with this standard under the solid fuel regulations. So what we have then there are smoke emission rate standards, moisture content, and sulfur content standards. Now, this is very much connected to energy poverty. So we know that people are burning solid fuels because they don't have homes that are warm enough in winter. So it's 29% of the population that is estimated not to have really adequately warm homes. And some communities are disproportionately affected. So we know that, for example, travelers, we know that lone parent households are dealing particularly with energy poverty. And that those who are renting or who are living in local authority housing are also more likely to experience energy poverty. The consequence of that, the picture there is of a wood stove, is that someone may instead be burning wood in an open fireplace, which has much more consequence for indoor air quality and consequently for someone's health. So we're in a situation where almost half of the housing stock is inefficient. This would be defined as having an energy rating below D. 11% of people are relying on solid fuels partly as a result of this. And you see an image there from a campaign, a really excellent campaign, which was run by Friends of the Earth in the UK. It was their Warm Homes for All campaign. What they did was to show essentially thermal images of people's homes, and you could see just how cold they are and the struggle to stay warm. And this has a consequence for people's health, for their physical health, for their mental health, and even contributes to excess mortality. So there's research on this saying that Ireland has among the highest rate of excess winter deaths in Europe. So what can be done about it? As with most environmental issues, there is a European legal framework of relevance to this. And I'm going to explain a little bit of that framework now. So at national level, the government has produced an energy poverty action plan. The European Union requires the government to assess the number of households in energy poverty and then to set a national target to reduce this number. And this is found in the governance regulation, essentially, indirectly, which requires Ireland to produce a national energy and climate plan, the NECP. Now, Ireland should take action and have a measurable target for reducing energy poverty, but hasn't done so. So that's one possible avenue in this context. Another is to look at housing law and to look at the minimum standards that apply there. And essentially, Housing for All Regulation 2019, the minimum standards set out for local authority housing, and there's also a minimum standard for private rental accommodation, and there are a variety of procedures and processes that can be followed to try and uphold these minimum standards. So broadly, the remedy, if it's a local authority housing issue, is to first make a complaint. And this is the kind of thing that we can assist with if it is a matter of advocacy. So after someone comes in through the clinic, we may open an advocacy file and we can assist with these kind of issues. If attempting to resolve it through a complaints procedure doesn't work, we can then go to representation. And we have a lot of experience in-house with housing issues. In addition, there are some supports available for private rented housing. And this, or so private housing, this is retrofitting. And what we see here is that these supports, most of them, and this is an exception here, most require people to put up some of their own money. So what happens in consequence is there's an inequality in access to these funds. There's funding available, but it's primarily people with access to capital who are able to avail of this and who are able to retrofit their homes and able to insulate. So one of the schemes that is available that doesn't require cost to be paid by the homeowner is the Warmer Homes Scheme. And this is available to people who receive eligible welfare payments. And some of the examples there, the fuel allowance, job seekers allowance for over 6 months. And it applies to homes that were built before 2006 and allows for certain kinds of insulation. And this can reduce the energy costs and address energy poverty. So I've put there are the contact details. It's the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland that you contact. So as mentioned, we provide advice to people through a clinic, and the process is essentially to contact us at either by phone or through the email address below. It's a free consultation. It's for up to 40 minutes. It's confidential. And if the matter is complex or it requires action on our part, you can make further appointments. And what we can do there is potentially to open either an advocacy file or a representation file. The important caveat to note is that we cannot assist anyone who already has a lawyer. So this is where somebody doesn't have legal representation and is looking for advice. Now, out of the clinics, we sometimes see issues that are systemic and that affect many people, and where there is a public interest dimension to trying to resolve the case through strategic litigation. And the goal of strategic litigation is broadly to address a gap in the law. In some instances, the gap in the law is such that litigating can lead the court to expand upon the legal principles that are applicable, and the resulting legal precedent can help others because they can then rely on that authority. So essentially, it has the effect of expanding opportunities available to people in similar situations to remedy their legal problem. Now, as mentioned, we also do law reform and policy work. In some instances, the gap in the law is too big to be filled through strategic litigation. There is not enough already available to us in terms of binding legal rules or case law that can be relied upon. And in such instances, it may be that this is a matter for advocacy work. So to advocate for law reform or changes in policy. And this is the other avenue to effect reforms that change the nature of systemic issues and benefit a large number of people. One of the issues that we've seen also through the clinic is biodiversity loss and access to green space. And you may be aware of this as something that also has an environmental justice dimension. So, for example, research produced called Mapping Green Dublin showed that some parts of Dublin had many, many more trees than others. And we see this, as you enter the city, you see inequality in the amount of green space available to people. And this is one aspect of it, is tree cover. But it's also parks, it's also access to biodiverse spaces. So we have assisted people who've come in looking for access to green space as a public amenity, who say there is a biodiverse space nearby. It was intended to be for the public, but it is now essentially in private hands, and we want to assert our public right of access. Other representation files, other clients that we have come in about community gardens, where they're seeking to have, for example, a lease so that they can continue to operate a community garden and provide services through that to the public. So we work with these clients to ensure that they have access to green space, and we use the existing legal framework to try and remedy these legal problems, and sometimes quite complex problems connected with other areas of law, for example, trusts. You might recall, in the context of biodiversity, that there was a citizens' assembly on biodiversity loss, and this was held in 2023. And some of the slightly despairing details that led to this and the recognition that something had to be done. Ireland, for example, has the lowest tree cover in Europe after Malta, and Malta is actually an arid country. So, for example, you would not expect Malta to be green for much of the year. You would expect Ireland to be green. Emerald Isle, lowest tree cover in Europe, and only after Malta, and only 1% of Ireland has the original temperate rainforest. So we've had also a great loss in our native biodiversity, 56% decline in native wild plants, and 20% of native species at risk of extinction. So as part of the Citizens' Assembly, people were brought together to discuss this issue and hear expert evidence on biodiversity loss. And they voted overwhelmingly that action be taken. And here there is a need for a lot of follow through, because to date, some actions have been taken and not others. And one of the recommendations was a constitutional amendment. That hasn't happened. So the recommendation that they made, there should be a referendum to the people to amend the constitution with a view to protecting biodiversity. And this also goes to that absence of rights we have with regard to the environment in our constitution from 1937. We don't have any right to clean air. We don't have any right to a clean and sustainable environment or a sustainable climate. And we don't have any biodiversity or nature-related rights in the constitution. So 83% of those attending supported the idea that there should be a referendum. And a referendum to also address these other substantive environmental rights. So this is rights of access to environmental information, rights under the Aarhus Convention, of course, as well. And uniquely and intriguingly, rights of access to rights for nature. So this is very groundbreaking. Other countries have protected this, but I believe if Ireland was to do so, we would be the first country in Europe. So that was very, very groundbreaking. And it shows the very strong response that people had in the Citizens' Assembly when they were exposed to information about biodiversity loss in Ireland. So there are some legal obligations with regard to biodiversity as well. And these are the obligations that can be considered when looking at what have public bodies done. So Section 5 of the Wildlife Amendment Act 2023, public bodies are obliged to have regard to the objectives and targets in the National Biodiversity Action Plan. And in the performance of their public functions, they have to have regard also to a plan, program, or strategy, objectives and targets in that plan, and any guidelines prepared by the minister. And the definition of public body in this section is really broad. It basically lists many of the bodies or all of the bodies that you would think of when you think of freedom of information. So very, very broad obligations. So I hope that was helpful to you and that you came away with some food for thought. I really welcome any questions that you have. I want to note that if you want to reach out to us about the idea of an outreach clinic, or if you want to access, for example, free advice clinic yourself, the way in which to do so is to contact that email address or to go through the website where there's further information about contact details. So I'll leave it open to you to ask questions. I look forward to a discussion and to hearing from you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Justine. That was such an excellent and comprehensive overview of our free legal advice clinics and the types of issues that are coming through our doors. So thank you. I noticed that one or two people have their hands up in the audience. If you would like to ask a question, could you please pop it into the Q&A box, and we're going to go through the questions now. So Justine, someone has asked, how do I know if I'm eligible to access your environmental clinics? Is it only Dublin based? And are the clinics only available to groups, or can individuals also attend?
It's not only Dublin based, so it's anyone nationwide, and it is not only for groups, but also for individuals. So anyone can contact through the information email address there or through the website and seek an appointment. And these clinics are held fortnightly, are essentially 40 minutes long. There are one or two small steps that you go through in order to be given an appointment. Essentially, we do an internal check for conflict of interest, and that's really it.
Thanks, Justine. I'm conscious that obviously we can't get into providing legal advice in an online webinar, but there is a question here, an interesting question. I'm a concerned mother living in an area with a lot of construction work being done. My son has asthma and it is getting worse. I also know that air quality is being monitored with a lot of air quality sensors in my area by a government-backed initiative. I've tried to access this information, but I've been stonewalled. Is there any solution?
Yes, I think it's important in that case to reach out to us, and very much like to hear from you.
So in that case, this would be an issue that should be booked into our free legal advice clinics, right?
Absolutely.
Great. Another question, are the clinics available both online and in person?
Yes, they are. So if you want to attend in person, you would come to the headquarters of Community Law and Mediation in Coolock.
And otherwise, we can meet people online anywhere around the country.
Either Zoom or by phone.
Exactly. Great. Great. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask in the chat box? So from Nathan asks, can I ask about tree protection orders? Is there any obligation on county councils to pursue these if requested? Are you familiar with tree protection orders, Justine?
I'm not familiar with the obligations of the county council, so I think you'd have to contact us. Very interested in following this up. I haven't had a query yet about tree protection orders, and it's something that's dear to my heart, so I'd very much like to address it. And I know that we do see mature trees being cut down with great regularity for all manner of reasons. So it would be quite interesting to look into this, and please do reach out.
Great, thanks. That's another one for referral to the clinic if you'd like to send an email afterwards. Thanks, Nathan. And just to say that these types of talks where we provide an overview and an explanation of our work, we are always open to delivering these to organizations directly. So if you think that this type of talk would be beneficial to your colleagues, to other organizations that you work with, please do let us know as well, because we're very keen to make sure that people who would benefit most from our clinics are aware of our services, and it is a great free service that's available. So we're keen to kind of reach those who need it most. Let's see if there's another clinic. Okay. Great. So if there are no other questions for today, I think that we will wrap it up. A recording of this webinar will also be available. So if you would like to watch that back, it'll be available on our YouTube channels within the coming days. And just to say again, thanks so much to everyone who has attended today. Very aware that most of you are working in organizations that work with communities that could benefit from these clinics. So we really do appreciate you taking the time. And I also just want to flag that we have 2 upcoming webinars over the next 2 Wednesdays. So next week, we're going to look at the obligations of Ireland's carbon budget programme. What does our climate legislation actually require? So that's going to be involved with Alan Brady, who is a barrister, and Professor Hannah Daly of University College Cork, who's going to discuss what measures actually need to be implemented in order to meet Ireland's carbon budget. The following Wednesday, then, we're going to look at the new Ambient Air Quality Directive. That's new EU air quality legislation that Justine referred to in her presentation. So we're going to be joined in that webinar by Emma Budd, who is an air quality lawyer with Client Earth, and Dr. Cale Lawler. So please do sign up to those webinar sessions and share them with your contacts, and hopefully we'll see some of you there. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.